Hey everyone, I'm Chris Lesniak,
And I'm Rob Byer, and this is
the Debate Math Podcast.
Debating Mathy Topics and Mathy Pedagogy with Mathy people just like you.
Let's get into this month's debate. Well, hello and welcome back to our summer hot seat series, and we have a good one for you today.
You ever find yourself happy with your lessons you're creating, only to have students forget everything a month later?
Perhaps, I don't know, we need to slow down more or spiral more. And as our guest today will argue, we need to be mindful in the way we sequence learning math.
Speaking of our guest, he is a passionate mathematics educator with an extensive experience in secondary instruction, curriculum development, and instructional leadership. He was an instructional coach and chaired the math department at Wilson School District in Pennsylvania. His commitment to sharing best practices extends beyond the classroom. He is a frequent presenter at national conferences, including ISTE, PCTM, P&C, the Global Math Department, and NCTM, where he has inspired and collaborated with educators from across the country. It's Dan Kaufman. Hey, Dan.
Hey guys, good to be with you. I'm looking forward to this talk and seeing where it goes.
Dan, can you tell our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
Yeah, so I'm outside of Reading, Pennsylvania. I work for the Wyomissing School District. This is my first year in the district. It's the district I live in. I actually walk to school every day with my oldest daughter. The building I'm in is a 7 through 12 building. So she's in seventh grade, and then my other daughter in fifth grade, I'll get her when she comes up in 2 more years. So right now I'm teaching seventh and eighth grade math, and I have some ninth graders and 10th graders mixed in there, and I'm teaching math 7 and an accelerated algebra class.
Also, the question that we always ask everybody: when did math first become controversial to you?
So I think this is my 19th year of teaching. I'm pretty sure. So you can kind of do the math. I always say I've been teaching since the turn of the century. Not quite though. That's being generous. But I think I grew up in a time. I was very fortunate. When I was a freshman in high school, I bought a TI-83 graphing calculator, not the Plus. That didn't even exist at the time. And I was always tech savvy. I was always into like coding on the calculator. It was like the equivalent of how much time kids on their cell phone spend on their cell phones. I was on my TI-83. And I think I benefited from the fact that teachers didn't know what those calculators could do. And I was very aware of it. And I had some fantastic teachers along the way. Like I remember my ninth grade teacher, it would drive me crazy. She was like, the best calculator is the one between your ears or whatever. And I was like, yeah, come on, like let's go. I can get these answers really quickly on my calculator. And it's something I like kind of still hold with me today is she knew what was better for me than I knew at the time. Because after her, all of my teachers were like, hey, you have a calculator, use it. And I used it. I used it for every test, every assessment. And after the TI-83, I got into college and I used the TI-89. And the perception was that I was a good math student because I could ring out bust out these answers really quickly. But what I found out is when I started teaching, I really didn't know math. So I had managed to make it through a high school and college as a good math student without really understanding math, but really understanding how to produce answers about accurate enough that it didn't cause any issues. But like 80% of the time I could get right answers, and that was good enough. So it was controversial when I realized I had a degree in math and I really didn't understand math.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that one. So thank
For
you so
sure.
much.
Yes, and with that, let's get into the debate. We begin with an opening statement from our guest. Dan, you have 2 minutes to present your arguments, and your time begins now.
All right. So when I first started teaching, I considered myself a good recreator of the textbook. I remember the district saying, "Oh, we've got a new curriculum," and there was this red Algebra 1 textbook, and I could like massage those lessons to include my students' names. And I always found a way to exclude word problems because those were challenging, and we had to go over homework, so that took up a lot of time as well. But I found myself to be a pretty decent creator of the textbook. Right. The problem I would run into is that I would then see these kids 2 years later, 3 years later, and there are skills that I knew I taught them. And they were like, Mr. Kaufman, we don't know what you're talking about. Right. And they're not lying. They're not like, hey, let's show up tomorrow and tell Mr. Kaplan we don't know what he's talking about. They really didn't remember. So what I was teaching really wasn't sticking. All right. And so I spent like 10 years out of the classroom in a coaching role. And it really was fantastic as far as like me developing an understanding of learning mathematics. And I was K through 12. So I got the whole scope. And so coming back into the classroom this year, I'm just trying my best to be more intentional about doing things differently and focusing on like, how does this work and why does this work? And the problem we run into is if you say that to teachers, they're going to say, but we don't have enough time, right? And so, I really got to this point where I'm like, okay, if I design this intentional, if I say, hey, this is so important, this big topic, I can be patient and say, look, I've designed for this to exist in this unit, but also in this unit and this unit and this unit. So it's okay if you don't get this understanding now, because by the end of the year, it's going to be a deep understanding that hopefully, you'll be able to recall later. So I've had to be patient, and that's taken years for me to like really understand math and understand learning and be comfortable to say, this is going to take time. All right. Kids don't always agree with that. They don't always like it. So this has been my shift for this year. All right. Identifying these big picture topics and spending more time on them because I know it'll serve kids well in the future. In the past, I used to, you guys know this spaghetti marshmallow tower project? Like they do it at PD days where like, hey, here's some tape and some spaghetti and a marshmallow. And you have to like get the marshmallow as high as possible in this tower. And they start the countdown. There's 5 seconds left. And everyone just starts throwing on more tape. Right. And they step back and they hold their breaths and they just hope that it works. Right. That's what I was finding my classroom was. And that's what I was seeing as a coach in the classroom. We kept saying like, hey, let's make the math classroom longer. Let's throw on more problems. And really what we were doing is we were trying to hold this marshmallow up high by just adding more stuff to it and hoping it would just stay, instead of saying, what if I redesigned this with those big concepts and those big ideas that set the foundation that let us build on top of this, right? And so that's been my push. It's like, how do I get this deeper understanding that will let everything else build as we go through the year, all right? And so I've got 3 warrants for this. The first one, kids don't remember rules, all right? And neither do I. If you ask me, the only thing I remember about factoring sums and differences of cubes is SOAP, right? Same, opposite, always positive. But every year I taught that. I had to reteach myself, how do you factor sums and differences of cubes, right? And so when we focus less on memorization of those rules and formulas, the math becomes more accessible, all right, and more equitable. Just to be clear, I don't want to say that those things aren't important, but there's a difference between memorizing versus committing to memory. All right. So my hope is that kids do have those memorized, but they've done it in a way because they've committed them to memory through the work that they've done over the scope of a year. The second one, if kids are seeing things as isolated topics, and this is how I used to taught, like when I was coming out of a textbook, like think of like Subway, right? You get your bread, you get your cheese, you get the meat, you can't go back. No, it's an isolated, siloed topic, and you move on, right? There's this pressure then for students to know that concept right away. And so we get this perception of, well, who are the good math students? The ones that get those answers really quickly and correct. So how do we change that so kids are constantly seeing these, how everything's woven together and everything's connected, and they develop that learning, that deep learning over time, which enables it to transfer, right? And the last warrant I have is that, I don't know if I have like a top 5 or top 3 things I want for my classroom, but definitely one of the things highest on the list is that I want students to be comfortable solving unfamiliar problems. So like I don't give practice tests. The first time the kids see those problems is the first time as on the test. I give them ideas of what's going to be on there. I tell them what's going to be on there, but I want them to be comfortable saying like, I don't know how to solve this. I'm not sure what the cookie cutter rule is, but I have a toolbox full of tools, and it's my job to find the right tools and apply them in this situation. So, how does our system allow that? I allow retakes. Do we allow retakes? That's a bigger issue. But that is my third warrant is kids have to be comfortable solving unfamiliar problems.
And wow, there's a lot that you just kind of unpacked. And as somebody who has seen you present many times, I find myself with more questions than I have like ideas in this moment. And so, like, my first question to you, and I want to talk about this idea of a um, being more mindful with sequencing, because many curriculums that are out there are designed with a logical progression in mind. So if they were to say that they feel, and this is just a blanket statement for any, would you respond that like the current sequencing isn't really all that mindful to build foundational knowledge?
So yeah, and it might be. Like, and sometimes you have to say, let me go through this curriculum one time to see like I just did a seventh grade curriculum and we were doing percentages. And I was like, oh, double number lines. We're going back to proportions. I'm like, oh, and it's coming up later in the year. I'm like, I had no idea because this is my first time going through this. And now I see it. So I would say for any new curriculum, go through it and see maybe it was really intentionally designed. On the teacher side, I teach Algebra 1 quite a bit. Like things like the relationship between equations, tables, and graphs. Right? I don't teach kids how to graph in slope-intercept form. We make tables. We make tables all the time. Then the kids will say, when in doubt, table it out. But then we start to make smarter tables. Like, oh, wait, why did you use 0 as your input? Or we look at the slope and say, oh, you know what? Let me use something that this slope will, multiply nicely so I get a nice number, And so we start to make smarter tables. And then over time, maybe we're doing a systems of equations a unit later, and we start to make even smarter tables. And eventually we're like, oh, you know what? These points are going up by the same value every time. That's the slope. This is called slope intercept form. So even within that curriculum you might have or that scope and sequence, I think we can be, like I said before about being patient, I think we could also be patient in saying, I don't have to jump to the name of this right away. I'm perfectly fine with us making tables. Is it painful? Sometimes I don't say painful, but is it efficient? No, but it works. And when we get to quadratics, guess what also works? Making tables. When we get to exponential functions, making tables. All right. And then we can build off of that. That's one of those transfer skills. All right. Can I make a table like in a smart way?
So you're saying that like it's not necessarily looking at the progression, it's like how you're teaching it and like introducing concepts that can then be used later on is what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
And that's where it's very difficult as, this is year 19 I just finished, and I have experiences, I've worked with kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So I've seen a lot of those pieces, but it's also me being comfortable saying like, I don't have this figured out yet. And I think as teachers, we try to do like the best job possible every time. It's okay with saying like, oh, next year, next year, I'm going to totally crush that because I didn't anticipate this coming up. So I think it's okay for us to say, yes, I want to see these topics coming up throughout the year in a way that makes sense, like that spaced learning over time. But also, how can I tease out information, or how can I get students to tease out that information because I'm withholding information, right? Which is tough to do. Like we know the game. I ask you questions, you tell me answers. And I had a kid do this the other day where I walked over to her desk and she just put her hand up. I'm like, do you have a question or are you just in student like mode? She's like, actually, I really don't have a question, but you were close by. I'm like, that's how they play. That's what they do. They're like, they ask questions, like tell them answers. And I have to be comfortable saying, I know this is coming up and it's okay if I don't tell you everything. That takes time.
All right, so I like this like building off like the table, let's say, right? Like coming back to the same skill over and over again. But I could just see many people wondering, I don't have time for this. I have so much to cover. Like the state exam needs them to do things in a certain way and answer multiple choice questions. Like how can you like focus on this one repetitive skill and still cover all the content that you need to cover, whatever that means?
Yeah, and so that's a pickle for sure. And I will say, like, in every district I've worked in, there are days where I'm like, I lost another day. I lost another day. I lost another day. But also, if we spend more time, and again, this is tough because I want to cover content. I want to get through all of that. It's tough again to say, like, if I spend more time building that marshmallow tower with a sturdy foundation, things can get piled on much easier. Because like I said, if we solved systems of equations this year and I went back and asked you to solve a systems of equations and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, then what good was that? And so we have to look at solving, I hate to be very specific about solving system equations, but there's a lot to unpack in solving of systems of equations, right? A lot of algebraic pieces, combining terms, graphing, making tables. And we can, if I have a student that's struggling maybe in graphing a linear equation, I can say, you know what? It's okay. Move on, move on, move on, move on, because I know I'm going to get you again in the next unit and we can work on that. So again, I think you just have to be comfortable saying, I'm pacing this. It's not a matter about spending more time, but just pacing it in a way that says this is really important and I'm going to make sure it comes up over and over again. Not treating math as siloed information from one chapter to the next, to the next, to the next.
All right, so it sounds like some kind of spiraling you're kind of doing throughout the units as you go forward.
Yeah, but I think it's more intentional than that. It's not like, hey, let's go do a random problem from unit 2. It's this is the big stuff, right? And we know what I always ask, like it's like summer school's coming up, right? And I think sometimes we treat summer school like a punishment because you chose not to learn it over the school year. And I always try to say, like, if we're going to do summer school, let's say instead of this is what you needed to learn from last year, let's look at what do you need to know in order to be successful in for next year. And those end up turning into your big topic items. Those are the things you want to see over and over again because you know it creates more access moving forward for the students.
Okay, and I have another question. In your opening, you said kids don't remember rules. And I wonder what you'd say to people who push back on that, that say like, rules worked for me. And we even on an early episode this season had Vanessa Vicaria on talking about algorithms, and she said that it does help some kids just to have the rule to follow. What do
I
you say
know
to those folks?
I have some kids like that too. They're like, just tell me how it works. And I think I really frustrate them, and I'm sorry. But again, like, I can tell you how things work, but if we don't know how, I can tell you the rule to get an answer, right? I can tell you, subtract or add. But if the problem is now unfamiliar, does that rule still work? And I want you to know rules, but I want you to know them after you have an understanding of like, oh, that makes so much more sense because now I know why that works, right? Versus, maybe this is part of like the perception of math. Maybe that's the problem is the perception of math is you just get answers, right? And I'll hear parents say that, I'll hear kids say that. They'll say, I like math because it's very black and white. The answer's either right or wrong. And I'm like, we're asking the wrong questions if that's your perception of math. And so I maybe that's the better push is like if kids want rules to produce answers, that's great. But maybe we also need to be asking different questions.
So, Dan, I want to go back to talking about sequencing again a little bit because, I think I'm thinking about things like statistics and probability and things like geometry because, historically and traditionally, it's always like at the end of the year. And sometimes it's not like taught prior to like a state test for whatever that matters to anybody. But then after the state test is over, sometimes it's still not taught. So are you saying that there's a way that maybe we could incorporate maybe statistics and probability a little bit earlier and geometry concepts and data and measurement, like bring that a little bit earlier and like tie it to other things? And like, if we're a little bit more intentional, is that what you're saying? And if so, like, what could that look like or what have you tried or seen?
Yeah. So let's take statistics, right? And I think it's easy for us to say like, there's a whole course dedicated to that once they get to be in 11th grade or 12th grade. And
Same with geometry.
Yeah.
A whole
Yeah.
course.
But what if kids don't take that course? Or what if they don't see it? Or what if you're a kid like me that was like, I loved geometry. I don't know. This isn't supposed to be what I'm supposed to say, but I really wasn't a good number cruncher kid. I loved geometry. All right. I have a 3D printer now that, it's like right in my wheelhouse of things I love to do. But I think that's our challenge as teachers then to say, this is important, right? And you'll see right now we're doing statistics. Well, here we are at the end of the school year and we're doing statistics, but some of my kids are really flourishing. They're like, I get this. I'm like, yes, you get this, right? And so I think that's our challenge is say, how do we fold these skills into the math? Parallel lines cut by transversals, right? And Pennsylvania, I think it's a seventh grade standard, but in the rest of the country, it's an eighth grade standard. That's geometry, but you're solving equations. So let's set up some hanger diagrams, right? And let's fold those two topics in together, right? We don't have to teach them as two separate topics, right? Let's get crazy and teach solving equations in the geometry unit or vice versa, right? The same thing with eighth grade slope. That's standard as a geometry standard, calculating slopes from similar triangles. Did I ever teach it that way? No, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? But no, it actually stems from a geometry standard with similarity, right? So a lot of that is actually written in there, and we just have to. And that's also I'm also a big fan of using a program and building from that, just because it allows me not to have to. This is maybe going on a tangent, but as a teacher, I was actually thinking about this today. Back in the day, if you ever heard of like a Craftsman home, right?
Mhm.
They used to just show up on a train and they would drop off your home and you'd have to build it. For Craftsman, the company, they would do. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that's how that worked. Right? Imagine being like a teacher and saying, "Here's all this math stuff. Build the course." And you're like, "Well, I mean, I know how to like hammer nails and I can follow directions, but now your focus is on building a course versus how am I going to teach this? What tweaks am I going to make where I can maybe combine some lessons?" And so that's where I'm a fan of saying, you know what? There's a lot of good math programs out there these days. Find something that works for you and build from it. That way you're not rebuilding this entire house, and that's where you're spending your energy. So if you want to combine some of those geometry standards, yeah, take the time and do that. And as a district, let's invest in that. I think a lot of times what I see is districts will invest money in programs, whether it be digital or physical, and where they don't invest is in the teachers through professional learning and professional development. The same thing with the administrators. They don't put the money into those programs, but those are the people. Like, I want the best carpenter building my house. Let's train this person how to be a carpenter. I want the best teacher teaching my kids. Let's train the teacher. And a lot of times we skip that step, but it's a huge step.
I'm gonna follow up that with my next question was about you mentioned how in your 19 years and being a math coach and things, you grew in your understanding of math and in your understanding of how students to learn and learn math, right? How do districts support teachers? Like this is time, money, years of experience. Like how do we help people, especially those new to the profession, let's say, how do we help people think this way if they do agree with you that and get the skills to do what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. So I just had a student teacher, right? And he was in my classroom all day for 109 days the second semester. And I learned a ton because I got to talk to him. Like I taught a lesson, he watched me, and then we kind of debriefed because he was teaching that lesson next. And we really just had good discussions about like, oh, I think that question could have gone there. And I think I could be, just talking through that. So just the idea too of being creative, right? If you have a strong teacher in your district, can we manipulate the schedule to say, I'm going to have another teacher in that classroom, not to co-teach, but to learn from that teacher and then turn that teaching around, right? If you have an extra planning period in your schedule somewhere, you could give that to that teacher and it would cost you $0. So those two teachers in that process would grow immensely and potentially not cost you any money, right? And so it doesn't have to be a one-off training in the middle of July where half the people show up. We can be creative about that. I would even say, thinking about administrators when they're coming into the classroom, what kind of feedback are they giving us? Right? Are they getting that training as well? Are we spending the money there because they're the ones that are doing the evaluation? And so sometimes I say, like, you know what? Let's train everybody up on the first 10 minutes of class. That's all we're going to talk about. That's going to be the goal for the school year, the first 10 minutes of class. What does that look like? How do we invite students into the space? How do we leverage student thinking to drive the learning? All of those things, right? Wouldn't cost as much the first 10 minutes of class. It would allow, and if you think about like money wise, every time an administrator is in your classroom for an hour, that's money, right? So we could say, hey, administrators, I want you to go into the classroom for the first 10 minutes and give the teacher feedback. And teachers, by the way, they're only going to be in there for 10 minutes. But I guarantee if teachers are crushing the first 10 minutes of class, right? Leveraging student thinking, making it visible, putting it on the board, coming up with some kind of hook in the beginning of the lesson that engages all learners and it's accessible. I guarantee if they're crushing those first 10 minutes, the rest of the lesson is going to be fine. And so we don't have to rebuild this whole system. We just can be creative about what we already have.
So the final question I have, for me, and to kind of wrap us up before we get into the final piece. So how do we get all stakeholders on board with this? Like, like you've been in some other roles. You've been, at a district level a little bit, and then you got back in the classroom. Like, how do we get
Yeah.
not just like the central office administrators, but community members, families? Like, how do we get people on board with this idea?
Yeah, right. Like, hey, we're barely holding on to these test scores we have, and you want me to just dump this all and try something new? And I would say, like, if you're barely holding on to the test scores you have, like, is that working? Like, would you want to be a student in your own class where you have more math, more practice? Because we need practice. And if you ever ask anybody, well, how much practice? There's never a number, like just more of it. Whatever it is, they need more of it. Right. And so I think you have to identify leaders that can say, like, hey, look, this is what we're doing. I think if you, as a district leader, if I say we are implementing a new curriculum and it might not go well, and that's okay, I think that gives the green light to teachers to say, okay, let's go ahead and do this. You have to have buy-in, right? I wouldn't just kind of show up in August with that statement. But I think it starts at the administrative level to say, let's change this. And it's okay if it's not great to start. Otherwise, if we're pinning those scores or pinning those on the teachers, you're going to have a hard time telling them, by the way, everything you do, wipe it clean. And we're going to hopefully this works better. So I think it starts at the administrative level. Do you have administrators in your building that are willing to say, this is what we're doing, and I'm comfortable and confident that's going to work? And it doesn't have to be like a principal. It could be a leader within your building, whatever that may be. But I think it starts there. All right, because the principal, the teachers, the students, the parents, they all communicate to the principals, right? And so as long as they're on board, I think that's a starting point.
Okay, I think that concludes our questioning round.
We will now end by giving Dan a few minutes to make his final arguments to you. Dan, floor is yours.
So we're kind of rolling into summer here, and thinking about what is something that I can do starting next year. If we believe that deep learning builds transfer, right? Start looking at your sequence of lessons and saying, oh, is there something that I can revisit with intentionality? And also, is there something that I could say, you know what? It's okay if the kids don't know this quite yet. Let's identify two of those things, one of those things. It doesn't matter, right? The years go by really quickly. And so as we identify those pieces that we want that deep learning to happen, let's also start to reframe the questions we're asking. Because if I'm asking questions like solve, which, simplify, which are fine, kids are going to see these math skills as isolated topics where they produce answers to the questions we give them, right? That goes back to me in high school and college. We're working out okay for me. But if we really want this deep learning to understand where the thinking happens between the ears, let's start asking questions of which, describe, explain, convince me, right? Can you compare? And hopefully that's a good starting point to say, okay, now this deeper learning is happening, right? And we can build from there.
Thank you. And that concludes this hot seat debate. I hope you gave some teachers out there some good food for thought. You definitely made me think a lot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's a longtime fan. Yeah.
Now it's up to our listeners to take a moment, ponder this hot seat discussion, and share with your friends what resonated with you about this debate. Be sure to follow us on Blue Sky at Debate Math to share your thoughts on this debate. What stood out to you?
And again, huge thanks to you, Dan, for being a wonderful, thoughtful, deep thinking guest. I love all the ideas you brought up.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And if I could throw in like one little tidbit here is, if you have deep thoughts, make like a Google Drive folder and put some documents in there that say like deep thoughts. So you can start writing stuff down, and you'll find that like the more deep thoughts you have, the more deep thoughts you'll have. All right.
Listen, and Dan's going to keep going and sharing so many more things for us to think about. And I'm probably starting a Google folder right now as soon as we get done. So thanks to all those who are listening. And we hope you enjoy and learn from this.
And wrapping up, Dan, where can listeners find you if they want to share their deep thoughts with you?
So on X, Twitter, and I think Blue Sky, I think it's the same thing, at KAUDAN721, which is my birthday. And then also my website is scmath.org. So student-centered, scmath.org. And you can find my email address on there and all that good stuff.
Okay, and we'll be sure to include all that in the show notes as well. Want to learn more about incorporating debate activities into your math classroom? Go to luzniak.com/podcast to sign up for my mailing list and get your first set of example debate activities you could use with your students today. Go to luzniak.com/podcast.
Don't forget to reach out to us with comments and questions on debatemath.com or follow us on Twitter at debatemathpod and follow along with hashtag debatemathpod.
Rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is super important to us.
Well, that's all from us.
Looking forward to debating with you more next episode. Until next time, cheers.